We look to expand into new markets quite quickly, and we're looking for any edge that we can have in order to be as agile as possible as we move to new market segments and new geographies. The philosophy I would take with ops is I see myself as a force multiplier inside the organization. Just like anyone in operations, we're dependent on other departments in order to be effective. So having the good internal relationships is key, but also then making sure that through those relationships, we are constantly improving things like productivity in the sales team. So that way we can scale and continue to get more efficient in the way we operate. And then in terms of how my experience has shaped that my journey, I have been working in sales operations, sales enablement, and run my own business. And through those different perspectives in different kind of tech companies, I've been able to get a much more strategic view of when things aren't working, why that is. So I have a series of tools that I would use to decide where the biggest bottlenecks are, and then identify and focus on what changes need to be made.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And that productivity and efficiency piece, I know we spoke earlier and you're talking about it's accelerating your time to market. Let's dig into that. Why is that the case?
Well, I'm working currently in a technology company where we have very ambitious growth goals, probably like most tech companies. And we look to expand into new markets quite quickly. And we're looking for any edge that we can have in order to be as agile as possible as we move to new market segments and new geographies. And one of the ways that I noticed when I started in the company that I'm in now, but a little over a year ago, is that we were set up in the very traditional format where you have marketing as one department, sales as another, and an implementation or customer success department as different departments. And when you have that kind of functional setup, you have these handovers. And at the handover points is where you often find friction. You often find that things don't get handled well, and you spend a lot of time having quote unquote alignment meetings to try to fix or put band-aids on it. And when I saw what was happening, some of the symptoms of that is you may have heard this before, where in the marketing to sales handover, you get salespeople who are saying, "Oh, marketing never gives us good leads," right? And it's a symptom of two different departments having different goals or different marks of success. And then when the implementation department receives a notice of sale that the sales department has sold something, and they say, "What did you sell? That only runs on PowerPoint." Then you know you've got another problem. And so before we were to hit that wall, I started to see some of the things that we would all have experienced in larger organizations where it's very functional, and saw an opportunity to redesign the front end of the business and make cross-functional teams. In the same way you now see, for instance, in the military, you see a lot more focus around special ops, which are small teams, cross-functional, versus sending in the whole division at one as a way of winning the war. So what we did is redesign the front end of the business around cross-functional teams, where you would take individuals from marketing, sales, and implementation and put them on the same team to work together. And we give them a named account list for each team, or what we call pod, to work on. And then they all have a shared common view of success. So they all share that same revenue number, bookings number, as a view of success. So now the discussion becomes, when these teams meet, is, not, what is your goal and what's your goal? It's like, we all have different talents. How can we achieve this bookings goal together? Can you in marketing generate some leads in this particular event? Can our implementation team look for upsell opportunities that we may not have considered? What can we all do as a team to achieve this shared goal? And so each pod has roughly 6 to 8 people in them. They represent marketing representation. We have our SDRs, our account executives, account management, and our customer success. And so the entire life cycle of every customer is managed by the same team. So there's no dropping, there's no handoffs. It is a very fluid transition of the customer with the same team. And that means that the people in the team have heard the customer from the very start, from the very infancy of the relationship. They've heard about them. They've been in the pipeline. They've heard. So the learning that happens from the implementation team already starts when they're a prospect, because they hear about them in the pod meetings every week, even though they're not in implementation phase. So what that's done is completely transform the way we collaborate across departments, because individuals have a shared view of success. It's sort of like in soccer or football. You wouldn't have forward, the midfield, and defense with 3 different views of success. Right? They all share a common view of what success is, getting the ball and the goal on the other end. And that's all we've done. We've taken 3 different departments and give them the exact same view of success. So they work together as a pod. And had we not had COVID, they would be sitting in the same office location around the same long desk together, working as a team. So they create a real team identity around that target list that they have. Does that make sense?
I think that's superb. That's superb. And there's 2 interesting things to dig into there. One is going to be on cultures and how actually cultures change. But the first I'm going to start is the idea of the buyer. What do you think the idea, or what do you think the effect that has on the buyer is? And did you see any changes to your metrics, in, for example, sales velocity?
Yes.
Or churn? Really interested to hear that affected things from your buyer's perspective.
Yeah, exactly. So for sure, we did see a lot more smoother transitions from our SDRs to sales all the way into the implementation. The other big win is a lot less friction internal to the company. What I could see is that we were going to be spending a lot more time doing alignment meetings and problem resolution meetings, and instead that time is now spent on the customer. And how can we grow that customer, support that customer? So the conversations have changed and the velocity has increased as a result of that. So it's been a positive change. And I think the other thing that salespeople would say is that they feel a lot more supported. We sell very large multi-6 and 7-figure US dollar deals. So they're quite large and complex enterprise deals. And you can't sell that alone. So many of the recruits that have come into our company have said that they've struggled to get the resources internally needed to sell effectively when they worked in other companies, but find that it is so easy when everyone they need sits on the same team and all willing to support, because they all have a shared foot in the common goal of hitting a certain bookings goal.
Superb.
That makes a big difference. So while it has been transformational for our company, we always think now in terms of pods. We think of when we open up new offices, it is not, do we just hire salespeople in a new region? It is, we know that a collective team can hit a certain revenue goal. We need to think from start to finish, the team, what pod do we need to hit this goal in this particular vertical? And so that way you don't get this zigzag of hiring where you get sales who lead and then implementation didn't know about the hiring and then they follow 6 months behind, and then you have customers who are unhappy. It's like, no, we know we need this complete unit in order to achieve this goal. So we hire based on pods in each region. And it eliminates a lot of the discussions and the ups and downs when it comes to hiring and so forth. So it's pretty easy to say, okay, we're going to expand. It requires this kind of investment because we're going to put one pod for this industry in this region. And that makes it easy for expansion.
Phenomenal. Like, quite seriously, I haven't quite heard of a pod tactic go this far before. Now, the other interesting thing is, because you said before it was siloed, now it's not, it's pod-like. But that requires a cultural shift in individuals. So what did you observe as your team members, sales, marketing, CS, implementation folks? How did they adjust to the shift? And interested to hear how you drove forward the mission with them before they could see the benefit of the result.
Yeah. So to get this transition to happen in the front end of the business, it required executive level buy-in. Fortunately, I've been working with this CEO on and off for 17 years. So he was very open to suggestions and knew that that the idea was worth testing. And so we created a 6-month pilot internal and a corporate OKR in regards to testing this and seeing how far we could come in 6 months. there wasn't necessarily resistance, but there was some uneasiness around roles and responsibilities.
Yeah.
So those first 6 months, we spent quite a bit of time describing who does what, including this new idea of a pod lead and what does that mean? What does an SDR have to deliver on the AE, et cetera. And we gave them each, from a compensation point of view, we gave them 1 foot in the individual goal. So they all have their own individual element, but they also have a foot in a team goal. And that foot in the team goal needs to be substantial enough to warrant collaborating with your colleagues. Otherwise, it's like you'll get back to the same old situation we could have been in, which is, I'm done my job, now it's your job. And so that's why we have a foot in the team goal. So the roles and responsibilities and clarifying those was really key in the first 6 months. And the other one that was interesting is that we physically moved people from their previous departments where they were all in, with colleagues and customer success. We moved them into the sales department. And they were like, oh, my friends that I have, my fellow CS members are now, way down the hall, and now I'm sitting in sales. So that took some adjustment, but I think they quickly found the value of it. And you found that, and we encouraged a team identity. Decorate the desks, make sure that people know what industry is represented at this pod. And now they are very much team oriented and defend each other. Like in forecast calls, you'll find a CSM, standing up for an account executive in a way you wouldn't normally do, because they all sit together. And so it's a strong team identity. So it did take those first 6 months to make the transition, but those are the 2 things I would say, roles and responsibilities. And it is important to physically move people, because it also helps support that mental shift that we're asking them to make in their role.
This is just great. Now the next interesting thing here is, if you look at sales today, if you look at actually any role, as you go up in seniority, you do have to think cross departmentally. Yeah. It may be a bit early to say, but I'd be really interested to ponder how this helps enable and empower people as they do move upwards through the organization, because they're already practicing the fundamentals in their pods today, I would have thought.
Yeah, exactly. So the pods create new career opportunities for individuals. So let's say, for example, we have an oil and gas pod in Oslo, where we're headquartered. We open a new oil and gas pod in the UK. Perhaps the SDR has been so effective that they now want to take on a sales role, and they can be a part of the UK pod. And we have others so you can move from an SDR role to a new pod, become a sales role. If you're in the sales role, you might then want to become a pod lead in the next pod that gets created. So the idea is that as we grow, we continue to grow a pod, split it, grow it and split it. And that's why I kind of morph it, if you will. And that creates new career opportunities for individuals to go to SDR, to sales, to team lead and regional manager. So it creates a very nice set of opportunities for individuals to continue to grow in the company.
Yeah, I can imagine. And that growth thing is important too. So yes. My question is going to be, how does this scale?
Yes, it scales quite effectively, because now when I speak to the CEO and we talk about opening up in new regions, I can tell them that this is the team we need. We know that we need the basic elements of a pod. We can put together a rough estimate of budget for how much that salary cost is and any other additional cost for office location, et cetera. And he now knows the investment that's needed in order to get things up and running. And then we have a pretty good idea that after a specific ramp time, we'll achieve this particular revenue goal. So it gives him a really good view, because if I had just given him the sales headcount, he's not getting the full picture of the other people who are needed to succeed. And then it creates a lot of friction internally. So we have a lot more alignment, because we're all thinking of the pod function as a way of scaling. So it really has changed our organization. It's the way we speak now in terms of growth internationally.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you think this needs to be the new way things are structured in most or any orgs?
I find that in particular, our business, we sell very complex SaaS solutions, and it requires a multitude of people to be successful. I think any organization that finds that its success is more and more leaning towards its ability to work across functions can get value from this approach. And so anyone who would be considering this and think, this might be something worth trying, I would definitely recommend a pilot. Don't change your whole front end of your organization overnight. Run it with one team around the specific account group or a particular territory or segment, and then flush out any of the challenges to address them as a pilot before expanding and growing it. But I think it's well worth trying. I find that our ability, our agility and speed is very much linked to how fast we work across departments. And so this pod technique or structure is one way to eliminate that friction so that we can speed our go-to-market, no matter what industry that we enter into.
Yeah. And as we know, speed in SaaS is absolutely essential. So if people were to do this themselves, what's one thing you've learned towards the end of this project that you would bear in mind if you were to do it again and replicate it?
The roles and responsibilities, we didn't realize, or I didn't realize in particular, how important it would be to really flush those out. And I could have done that before creating the pods, but I found out sort of afterwards how important and all the questions that came up. And so then I really spent a lot more time drafting the roles and responsibilities. So if you had done that in advance, discuss that with the team members, I think they would have hit the ground running even faster. Eliminated a lot of the questions, and you won't get them all, but you might have gotten it 80%, which would have been a good start. So that would be the one thing, is really thinking about the roles and responsibilities. And I just find that you look around and you'll find more and more examples of where cross-functional teams have succeeded. And I think it's a different way to differentiate yourself, because there's only two ways for anyone to stand out. It's either what you offer, so your value proposition in terms of your products or services, or it's how you offer it. And this is taking a real position on changing how we offer our value. So how we come across to our clients, and that they get to know the entire team through the entire life cycle, and they don't feel like they're being handed off or thrown over a wall and not knowing who's who. It's a very consistent and fluid relationship that moves from one person to the next in a very natural way.
Yeah, superb. And none of this having to spend 10 minutes every time you speak to someone new to re-explain what's going on. Great. Ian, final question for you. If you're in a room full of sales ops superstars, what would you ask them?
I'd be interested to know what some of their best practices. In particular, I'm very focused on cross-functional working now. And I see that not only structurally, but I'd be looking for tools and other things that accelerate the cross-functional working of different departments, to sort of greasing the wheels from one department to the next. Because I see that whether we're growing very fast as a company, and I find that we can easily spend more and more time in alignment meetings. So how do you eliminate that and create natural flows of information that don't require these 30-minute, 1-hour meetings just to get in line with one another, that it would happen naturally? So I'd be looking for best practices around this sort of cross-functional working inside of organizations. That would be my topic of interest.